event of our 2023 SASA Halloween Bash series. This is the first of what we hope to be multiple panels moving forward, conversations beyond the classroom. The topic for this is Ancient Monster Mash. To get started, just a little bit about SASA and what we do. We work to promote the study of the ancient world and engagement with our human deeper past, building a grassroots movement through outreach, collaboration, accessibility, and public scholarship. We work toward our goal of inspiring a wide, inclusive community of scholars, learners, and students. You can find us on all of your major social media networks. Simply search Save Ancient Studies. You can find us there. Our live event protocol. While we're streaming, we just ask that you please be kind and respectful. Listen and ask thoughtful questions throughout the event. You're free to put them in the chat, and if we have time, we'll try our best to answer them. Please be patient with technology and those administering it. Our live events are live streamed on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, and they will all be recorded and archived afterwards. Have fun, lastly. Please do consider becoming a SASA supporter. Join the community of SASA supporters through a monthly donation as little as $3. You can subscribe on Twitch as well for $5 a month, but really any amount helps. With your subscription, you get perks. See our SASA supporter brochure for more details on those. And we'll also send out quarterly updates on the progress that has been made with your support. And thank you for joining us. One last piece of business I'm going to put out there before we get started. We are currently running a fundraiser for our Halloween bash. This seems perfect to put it out there. It's a one-time donation. If you make a donation, just $1 through PayPal, according to your favorite ancient monster, either a Greek Sphinx, Aztec Cipactli, Japanese Kappa, Biblical Lilith, the winner will be featured in an upcoming SASA TikTok. And if you are interested in that, you can scan the little SASA QR code in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, and it will take you straight to our Halloween Bash page to learn about your various options for supporting us. All right. And now, I guess to begin, we'll just go round table and introduce ourselves, say a bit about what you work on, what your projects are, if you are involved with SASA or not. My name is Cassandra. I run the live events team here at SASA, and now I'll pass it over to Martine, going right from my right.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Martina. I come from the Netherlands, but I'm currently as a postdoctoral fellow research position in Johannesburg. So I am in South Africa. Here I do a postdoc in classics, working on communication security and secret messaging in the ancient world. And I have been involved with SASA for a while. I've also given some classes and master classes on that theme. I'm the website manager as well for SASA, and I'm joining these events. I say thank you all for joining. I'm sure it's going to be fun.
Yes, absolutely. And without Martine doing that work there on the website in the background, I could say we would be lost. So thank you. Now, moving on to Zilla.
Hi, I'm Zilla Black. I run a YouTube channel called Zilla's Athenaeum, and you can find me on Mastodon and Blue Sky at Zillable if you're interested in that. I also do run Twitch streams. I will be streaming actually after this. I do Archeo Gaming, where I talk about video games and their ancient studies content, whether that's linguistics, history, archaeology. I have full playthroughs with my commentary for Forgotten City, Heaven's Vault, a bunch of stuff like that. I'll be starting Chants of Sonar today, which I am given to understand will be on SASA's Archeo Gaming live streams sometime in the next few months. So that's pretty exciting. So my I'm an independent scholar at this point, but I do have 2 higher degrees in classical philology, so mostly focusing on ancient Greek and Proto-Indo-European linguistics. But I do have also an interest and a background in ancient Japan. Oh, and in my other hat, I'm SAS's program coordinator, but
Also very vital to us. And moving on, I guess, Carla. Thank you for
Hi.
joining us.
Hello, all. My name is Carla Ionescu, and I am an ancient historian. My PhD is in ancient history, and the focus of my PhD is the goddess Artemis, and literally everything that encompasses her. You can find me online under Artemis Expert. Currently, I am the only academic working in this field. And so I am hoping to meet others and also to develop further research on the goddess Artemis. I've published the first book, which is on the Greek Artemis. It's called She Who Hunts. And I have maybe 6 more to go of Artemis around the world. My next one is Artemis of Ephesus, which is the focus of this next piece. I also run a podcast called The Goddess Project on YouTube and everywhere else you get your sorry, I just got disconnected. Where everywhere else you get your podcast, and there I just informally talk about goddess things and monster things and all fun things. I'm very interested in archaeogaming. I don't play video games, so I don't know how to get in there. But one of the things that I've done just recently was I worked on a DreamWorks project where they needed a historian consultant they're kind of doing like a kids Indiana Jones thing, and then they were asking for some kind of history consultant, and it was so much fun, like so much fun. And it's my passion to get history right as accurately as possible. And so that's something that's really fascinating to me. Is my students are always like, "Oh, Carla, there's like this Artemis temple, and I can't remember what video game now, or there's Artemis in this. What's the one with the gods? I can't remember what the game is called." And I'm like, there is. And they're like, you need to start playing video games more. I go, can I play as Artemis? Like, can I play that role? So that sounds really interesting. Yeah. And so I'm looking forward to today and looking forward to talking about what monsters. Sounds like it's going to be fun.
Absolutely. And we're happy to have you here. And last but certainly not least, Jess.
Yeah, sorry joining a little late. My name is Jess Johnson. I am an Egyptologist. I'm based out of UC Berkeley, but currently I'm at the University of Basel in Switzerland. So hence I got my time zones a little bit mixed up. Currently, I am studying mostly Book of the Dead, monsters in there, and specifically demons. So that's kind of what I'm working on. And obviously that kind of encompasses all manner of what I like to call creepy crawly things in ancient Egypt. So I'm excited to see and compare with everybody else about things that they've heard of and see sort of what it means to be or have a monster.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us once again. I guess I'll just jump right into the first question we have here. Do you have a favorite monster myth? What's your favorite ancient monster? And can you tell that story maybe for people who don't know it? And whoever wants to go first, jump on in. Otherwise, I'll start calling names.
Well, I can take that.
Sure.
I actually have a favorite category, which has a lot of stuff in it. It's a little bit of a weird one because I am really fascinated by monstrous women myths and the ways in which across so many different versions we wind up with these, femme fatale myths. And so my actual ancient favorite monster myth is probably Yuki Onna, which is a Japanese myth. So in Japan, they have these sort of spirit monsters called yokai. That's sort of the general term. And a lot of them are kind of like nature spirits or ghosts, but they're kind of an indeterminate category. And one of them is the Yuki-onna, which means the snow woman. So the story is that a poor farmer was lost wandering in the snow in a snowstorm, and he sees in the distance, in the swirl of the snow, the figure of a woman, and he kind of passes out at her feet. And she takes him in and she cares for him, and they end up, having a night of passion. And she tells him that if he ever tells anybody about her, that it will come to ruin him. So he's enchanted, he wants to stay, he wants to come back, but alas, in the morning when the snow has settled, he finds himself safe, healed, but alone. And so he goes back to his life. He actually has very good fortune. He makes his name for himself. He has a little house, and he never sees her again, except that one day a baby is left on his doorstep. So he takes the baby in, and he raises it, and he has a good life. He gets married. He keeps on going. And then one day, somebody asks him where his child came from. And he tells them. He tells them the story of the Yuki-onna. And in the night, the whole town is blanketed in a blizzard. And the Yuki-onna appears to him, possibly in a dream, but this time she's not beautiful. She is tattered. She is covered in blood, and she knifes him in his sleep. And that's how the townsfolk find him.
Wow.
Brutal.
That's
Brutal.
amazing. That's a fantastic story. It reminds me of several stories, if I can just.
Mhm.
So as you're talking, so I just wrote down a bunch. So it reminds me of the Selkie myth, right? I don't know if you know the Selkie myth, right? It's something similar where there's a beautiful woman, they live together, but he hides her Selkie fur. They have a child. Then she gets called back to the river, and then she calls the child back to the river, and the man is, So it reminds me of that. It reminds me of the Aphrodite myths where she drops off children on the front doors of the men that she has children with. And it reminds me of Aquaman, because Aquaman is raised by his dad, and his mother sort of, she's of the water. They have this short affair. She returns, leaves Aquaman. And so I thought, oh my God, and the way that you're talking about this myth, like so many connections. Very, very cool. Very cool.
It is. It reminds me of the sirens in the Odyssey. Also, beautiful women who can be dangerous if you get too close to them. Basically, if anyone doesn't know who they are, I'll just give a bit more context. In the story, we see that it is Odysseus and his man. They have to sail past the sirens, who are beautiful women. They can sing so beautifully that everyone wants to follow them and be with them. If you get too close to the shores, that there will be a shipwreck. Many of them won't survive and such. So it's very dangerous actually to get too close to this man. And what it says in the story is Odysseus' man, they had to fill their ears with wax to make sure they couldn't hear anything, and they would keep rowing still without noticing anything. And Odysseus was the only one who was able to hear them, but they still had to bind him with ropes bind him to the mast with ropes. He couldn't jump up and go to the sirens, because apparently they would sing so beautifully that everyone wanted to be with them. But it was very dangerous, and that's also a bit that femme fatale idea of those women who are so beautiful, but also very dangerous in a way.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like the like femme fatale, powerful woman narrative is like one of the only things that's missing in ancient Egyptian mythology. Like you have, right, women who are deities who have power and who have exacted vengeance upon people and sicked different all manner of, you know, awful things on people. But what it does remind me of actually is that most of the monsters or like crazy mystical creatures often happen to be like female or ending in a female name so that we assume that they are identified as female, which is really interesting. My favorite monster, her name is Amit, and I call her because her last name ends in a T, which is a feminine ending in ancient Egyptian. So, you know, I think that she's a she. Um, but she's this mystical creature or this composite creature that has the head of a crocodile and the like front body of a leopard or a lion, and she has a hippopotamus behind. And I think she's really well known, right? Because she's like this. A lot of people link her as like a precursor to the chimera or something of that sort. Um, and I think she really fascinates people because she sits at the weight of souls, right? So there's a spell in the Book of the Dead, spell 125, where as a deceased person, you're journeying through the underworld and you get to this point where your heart is weighed to see essentially if you're a good enough person to continue on into achieving everlasting life. And everybody wants to pass. Most people pass. You know, we don't have any record of anyone not passing, but there is Amit who waits right at the scales just in case. So, you know, if you don't pass, she consumes your heart and your entire being ceases to exist. So every memory of you is gone. Every person related to you is gone. You having ever existed in this universe is completely gone, which I think is a pretty amazing power to be able to have. But poor Ahmed is usually always starving because no one ever wants to depict themselves not having ever achieved or passed the scales. Yeah, but it's interesting that she is often seen as like a female personified monster.
Yeah, well, I guess if she is essentially damnatio memoriae, the full erasure of your entire
Yeah.
existence embodied, then we wouldn't have any records of people not passing, would we?
No, I don't think anyone wants to do that to themselves. Like, oh, you know, this they want to depict what they exactly what they want to happen, right? So you don't want to condemn yourself to that fate.
That is very frightening. just thinking just thinking of that, I think, and especially for the ancient Egyptians, that would have been the erasure was probably like the worst thing that could ever happen. So maybe we can't even like really imagine the fear that she arose.
Yeah, 100%. Like everything that your life is culminating. Well, your life and death is culminating up until this point, right? Where you're so close to achieving everlasting life and, you know, being able to last in your name and memory for your family and your afterlife. And then this is the moment where all of that could be gone and you cease to exist. Yeah, the amount of things it connects to, it would be terrifying. I mean, I feel like it's terrifying for us. And, you know, I'm not even an ancient Egyptian, so.
I mean, the idea of the memory of your existence, the record of your existence being your afterlife is kind of common to the region. You know, the Greek kleos aphthiton, which actually we can trace to Proto-Indo-European roots at least. The glory undying, and like this idea of the poet who can keep your memory alive, the poem that will make you eternal. We see that a lot in like there's a Sappho poem where she talks about the names that she writes into her poetry making herself at like, you know, making herself and her subject immortal, and then we have that same sentiment copied in Horace later in Latin.
Yeah.
And for those of you who like silly connections to modern pop songs, there's actually a Bastille song that does the same thing, and I'm pretty sure it's on purpose.
Oh,
What song, might I ask? I love Bastille.
Oh God, I love them so much. I mean, they came out with Pompeii, and they're like
Yeah.
actually talking about Pompeii, like realistically, and
Exactly.
they did a
Okay.
live version in the Pompeii exhibit. Just
oh wow.
beautiful.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, you can find the video online. I'm trying to remember the name of the song, but like I don't remember the name of the song, but like it's like I have written you down now, you will live forever. And
Yes,
it's like it's
I know
so
exactly which one you're talking.
you know, Monumenti Aegi.
Well, this
what I also
conversation. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
sorry. What I also
No,
find quite interesting is that many of these monstrous creatures are in a way depicted as females, and what you see, especially in Greek mythology and Greek society as well, a bit less in Roman, but you see it there as well, is that it really shows the role of women in society in those days. Like they were really subject to anything that happens in their lives. They couldn't decide anything for themselves. Like it was their fathers and their husbands who were in charge of their of the household. Women like Pandora, Medusa, and so they are seen as they were so dangerous, you sort of had to lock them up, or they would be a danger not just to themselves but to all of society. And I think that is a way why many of those mythological monstrous creatures are also depicted as women. And of course, I'm glad that things have changed by now, but in those days it shows how society, yeah, it shows through mythology how society worked in those days.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Actually, and that kind of connects back to what you were talking about, sirens. One of the things that I'm finding, and it's really fascinating, both for my favorite myth, but also for the sirens, is that the sirens are half bird, half women, and they are half bird, half women because they're punished, at least in one story, by Demeter for not watching over Persephone when Persephone is taken by Hades. But they're also the guides to the underworld. So there's also this connection for the sirens. I mean, they guide the souls to the underworld. So to me, it's also that there is something about the monstrosity of these women that allows them to tap into the darker spaces. And even for the one that you for the atma that you're talking about, Jess, too, is this idea of they can enter the ugly. I don't know if that makes sense. They can enter the uncomfortable.
Mhm.
They can enter the aggressive, all of these, right? All of these realms, which I know heroes and stuff can enter as well, but there's often some other consequence that they must submit to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, now that I'm thinking of it too, is like the idea of Sekhmet, just as sort of a goddess that scares the gods. Even I don't know if she's a monster, right? That's to make sure might not qualify, but maybe
Yeah.
frightening.
Yeah, I mean, right, Sekhmet has like a lion head and is well known for this sort of dual personality, like the chaos lives within sort of thing, right? If you anger her enough, it doesn't really matter who you are, you're going to seek that wrath. But yeah, I don't know if she really qualifies as a monster, but what is a monster? Rather. But when you were talking, it did actually remind me of another deity, Tueret, right? Who is she's a standing hippo. She's a pregnant standing hippo who has a crocodile for a spine that goes all the way down her back and like comes over her head. And when you were talking about like these sort of like fearsome, powerful, feminine identified like creatures having this ability to go between these different spaces, you know, I started kind of saying, oh, well, that just sounds mostly like power. And Tueret is really one of these deities who is fully animal, right? So could be kind of considered monstrous. And you see her depicted in a lot of roles of protection, right? She is a goddess who protects travelers, women, birth, children. So she's very much invoked for her ferocious and powerful sort of iconography in these moments where you need someone to protect you because you're vulnerable, you're traveling, or you're in the middle of giving birth. You know, and there's also demons and other creatures that have similar iconography that can hurt you. So, she has these inspirations of these dark places, but that power is turned around and invoked for protection at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, a hippo is still
Oh,
the deadliest animal in the world.
yeah, they do not mess around. And yeah, it makes sense. Like when you think about it in real life, right? Hippos are incredibly territorial. They're really aggressive. They're incredibly protective of their young.
And they're huge.
Yeah,
Huge.
massive, huge
They take
teeth.
up space. Yes.
Yeah, and I think like to this day they're one of the only animals that can like kill a crocodile, which is like another fearsome creature in the natural environment of the Nile. So you're like, yeah, combining those two makes sense if you want something that is powerful.
And I think she also really shines a light on the other half of the sort of femme fatale trope, which is the other thing about women that's scary is that they can create life.
Right.
Women as mothers. So like we have these like
Yeah.
the monstrous, so like to go back to the Japanese myths is like we have these monstrous mothers, the Yuki-onna, the Kitsune spirits, stuff like that. But then we also get like La Llorona in Nahuatl, over in the Aztec culture, which actually predates, I believe, the Spaniards, but not by much, or at least our recordings of it. And that is the ghost of a woman whose children were taken from her, who kills other children in her search for her children. And so she is also this deadly, ghostly woman, but she's not out there just, like seducing men, which, lovely male fantasy power everywhere. But she's also like she is in particular focused on the other end of the, distinctly female life pattern of children and the danger of children, the ability to give life, but also the danger that both mother and child might die, which is probably the single most dangerous thing that anybody can do is to give birth.
Yeah, Zilla, that's so interesting because once again, you're connecting me because that story connects to the Empusa story in Greek myth, which is the goddess that, of course, Zeus impregnates, and then her children are killed or taken from her, and she's blinded, and she becomes a divinity or monster. Actually, probably that's better how the Greeks would have thought of her, who eats children, and she is said to be the early vampiric influence. Certainly in Europe, because she comes out at night, she's got fangs, she drains the blood life out of the children, and is often seen as like a threat for young people. Do not go near the water, don't go near anywhere where Empusa might. And that ties into how many children died in their youth for a variety of accidents and illnesses. And so it's fascinating. I agree that you have this female monster that can give life, because she certainly had children, but then also there's a vengeful aspect of her because her children were taken. She now forever consumes other children, so she's like a warning or a threat for others.
Yeah, and just to sort of bring that back around to what Jess was saying about how that can also be invoked for protection, like this is not always a monster thing. I mean, not that we have a firm definition of monster, but like in the Near East, we have the goddess who I'm forgetting her name, but she mates with her husband, and then in the process of becoming pregnant, consumes him, and then she bears him as a child again, and that's like the cycle of death and rebirth. And so we see that as like the great mother goddess figure. So this sort of terrifying, terrible power can be awe-inspiring, can be seen as protective, or it can be seen as dangerous and dire, just depending on which culture we're looking at what time.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I wear a Medusa pendant for the same exact reason, because Medusa is a protector. She is not a well, okay. Again, the definition of monster. I had a meeting this morning where we talked about women's rituals in ancient Greece where they wore gorgon faces as part of the ritual. And so that really ties into this idea that they wore that as a symbol, as a sign of protection, that somehow the monstrous protected them, in this case from the patriarchy, from the wildness, from the violence of men. But perhaps we can expand that to like this idea that the frighteningness of something or a creature can actually also protect the bearer of that.
Yeah, and you find gorgon faces on grave steles all over Greece.
Yes. And they used to have them
Cons-
on stoves so that the evil spirits would not enter the yeast of the bread and the bread would rise.
Ah,
They
yeah.
have them on their houses and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's just a general apotropaic, and like when you take that into the mythology, you actually come back to again a powerful goddess, because where does Medusa's head end up? On the shield of Athena.
Exactly.
Yes. 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 And she wears it also as a symbol of protection.
Mhm.
And then, of course, we see him on Leonidas's shield and all of these, warrior Spartan shields, the head of Medusa, and it starts this whole. So yeah, So I think that you bring up a good point. Like, what is a monster, especially a female monster? What is the real for me in the story of Medusa? The real monster is Perseus. I mean, she's just chilling out, she's just living in her cave, having a good time, enjoying herself away from any other. And the only people that we have on, at least on record, and I say that loosely, that she turns to stone are men, and they're usually men that enter her cave. And so then, and here goes Perseus purposely going in there to mutilate, kill her, take her head, and use it as a weapon. So I don't know. I definitely lean towards Perseus being the monster there.
Yeah, I actually think Poseidon's the monster there,
No, I agree. Yeah.
because the way that Medusa comes into being, one of the ways, because sometimes she is like one of a set that were born as Gorgons, but most of the time she is turned into a Gorgon from a beautiful human woman because she was sexually assaulted by Poseidon.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And specifically because she
Yes.
she cried about it. She didn't say okay, whatever, and move on with her life.
Yes.
Yes.
That idea also reminds me of Medea. Like, what is a monster and what is a monstrous person or so? Medea, when Jason abandons her, decides to kill her own children in the end, and also Jason's new bride, but especially her own children. And she does it to make sure that Jason's complete bloodline is died out in that way, because it's not. I think it's not just that she wants to. Yeah, of course she wants to take the most precious thing that there is away from him, their children. But I think it's also a way of more or less ending Jason's bloodline by killing the children and then his new bride, to make sure that at least for a while there won't be any other children, showing that the person who has given birth, so Medea, the mother, can also take that life away again.
Yeah, Medea is a really interesting case.
Oh yes.
Because there's also this aspect, because particularly her killing her children, the first attestation we have of that, and probably the first time it was part of the myth, was when Euripides wrote the play. So earlier versions of the myth don't seem to have her killing her own children. But when we do see her do that, we get plenty of internal motivation where she talks about her reasons for doing it. And one of the reasons is, again, protective. Because if she leaves her children there, they will be mistreated and slaughtered by their father's new family. And it's one of those really interesting things that at the end of that play, Medea rides off in triumph, not just like, haha, I did it, but like in the chariot of the sun. Like, she is holy in that moment.
Yes.
So like there's such a mix there.
and even then she takes the bodies of the children with them to completely take them away from Jason.
Yeah, I think that there are many instances, even in real life, like in tragedies and trauma, where women or mothers or families have chosen death rather than, an imprisonment or enslavement or other violences. So I think that, yeah, I think that that is a really powerful. I mean, it's tragic, it's devastating, but it is a way to protect from additional, so then again, who is the monster, right? Like, if you have to take the lives of your children or your family in order to protect from what is coming, then one would argue that what is coming is the monster, right? But the focus tends to be on the woman. Oh, how does the mother do that? But it is what is the threat that is really even more monstrous than death, a life even more frightening than death, yeah.
Yeah. And from an ancient Greek woman's perspective, life as a war captive or slave is a really plausible and unpleasant end.
I mean, it makes me think, or question what the purpose of these myths were. Was it to express, fear, or was it a way to maybe control parts of the population? And I don't know, maybe you guys have some thoughts on that.
I mean, I think in a lot of cases, especially the myths that I was talking about initially, these are warnings to young men about the dangers of strange women, of following your heart or your other parts into danger. And like, there's a lot there also that is meant to condition women of being not like that.
Yes.
Don't be that, because that is monstrous. And I think it's a really strong way of reifying norms in a patriarchal setting.
I also think that there is a fear of beautiful women, that beauty. So, and love. I think you're absolutely right, Zilla, because there's always the victim is always either falling in love or going after beauty, or there's this kind of, so for a young men, perhaps, or men, it might be something like, oh, be careful of beautiful women, or you're not going to be in control of yourself around beautiful women. And yet the consequences seem to be that the woman becomes the monster, in that situation. Or she becomes uglified or monstrosized in some way. Her beauty is seen as a punishment to her. Perhaps this was also a warning, like young Persephone, for beautiful women or young women, however beauty was identified then, to like be aware of the threat that your body presents. Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking about something that Jess was saying earlier about Amit, because the idea of a female monster who is not a beautiful woman, who is not those tropes, but is still identified as female, like Amit, like Scylla or Charybdis, for instance.
So that was my monster that I was gonna. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Go for it. It's okay.
So Scylla is the giant whirlpool. Oh no, I'm switching them. Sorry. Scylla is the multi-headed sort of snake monster that eats people right out of their boats. And then Charybdis is a giant whirlpool. It's almost like an antlion at the bottom of the whirlpool that just swallows boats and crushes them. And they're both identified as female, even though neither of them has anything remotely resembling a human form. Same with the Hydra, same with Echidna, mother of monsters. She was a monstrous snake form who gave birth to things like Cerberus. And like all of these completely like alien or animal or whatever, or even like natural formations, they're given female identifiers because
Yes.
that's what men find scary, is the things they don't know
Yes.
about. Women
Yeah.
who they can't be controlled, women who have
Yes.
power.
Yeah.
Or things that are
And I
more
think
physically
that's
strong. Sorry, things that are more physically strong than, like, for example, a whirlpool in an ocean or a hydra, things that are
yes.
have greater physical strength. Them probably might be what's
Yes. And the Sphinx is usually also seen as a female character who is with her riddles is tricking the man who with her riddles is tricking the man who tried to save the city of Thebes from the terrors of the Sphinx. In that way, also showing that women were seen as cunning and treacherous, and it was just very tricky, and you had to, again, that idea of you had to sort of lock them up and stay away from them.
Yeah, I do really think it just goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like this ability to give, create, and also to take life, right? Like even when you get into like the monsters where they're creatures, right? They're creatures that are known for being super protective, or especially of their young, and being able to kill anyone or anything, right? Like these natural disasters that no person can fight against, but yet you can still die from them. I feel like it really condenses into the female form because of the ability to give birth, right? That you end up having this like, oh, you can take life and you can keep life, and that you can create it, and that's really terrifying. That's something that, you know, maybe men are seen as not being able to do. That's a fearsome thing, and it's also something that can and cannot be controlled at the same time.
Yes, and I think the cunning and, historically speaking, the long association between women and snakes, women and birds, women in the natural world, that sort of symbiotic relationship makes sense actually, just so when you're saying about how how the monsters can be seen as female too, that there is that there's this direct association between women's connection too. And so this is why Eve in the garden speaks to the serpent, or the serpent speaks to Eve, right? Back to that cunning, that knowledge. So yeah, I think that ties into what might make someone scary to perhaps others who cannot understand that. And I was just thinking also the bleeding, 7 days of bleeding without dying, give or take. Is in a way frightening. It's, even today that we have it explained, if you think about it, it's still in a way magnificent. Like, yeah, okay, they can explain the whole process of how that happens and why that happens and everything, but if you think about it, it's still like, yeah, you're bleeding. And in a warrior culture, in a culture where blood is valued, bleeding is valued, being injured is valued, and you're looking at these bodies that are bleeding and can survive, perhaps your first reaction is that's sacred, or perhaps your other reaction can be that's monstrous. I don't know, but
And in a lot of cases, as we've been talking about, both.
Well, yeah.
And like, if you want to talk about like the ancient biblical tradition where we get Eve as the sort of original cunning and the Pandora figure, in a very literal way. But that's also where we get, that's where we get Lilith. But if you even just look at Jewish laws around menstruation, ancient Jewish law is that menstruation is unclean and has to be kept from society, and it's sort of this dual thing of when a woman is on her period, she has to be pampered, but she also has to be secluded and cleansed.
There's
It's like
the
it's both.
mikvah bath that is like a scrub.
Yeah. And so like there's this dual thing of reverence and disgust that kind of follows it.
Yeah. And the more we talk about it, the more I wonder if it's literally just an inability to understand. an inability to know, because if you're in a different body, you don't know. And so then instead of turning towards the positive of just understanding and accepting, over time we've turned towards gross, disgust, like put away, or control.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, we also have to recognize that a lot of the writing that survives is explicitly male.
Yeah.
Because it's not like there wasn't a female tradition, a female side. There always has been, and we have lots of evidence of it around the margins, but for so long it was either actively destroyed or actively ignored. I'm like, I have a friend who in particular studies, calling them apocrypha seems wrong, but like fan fiction of the ancient world about the Bible, about the Torah, and it seems to be a lot of women writing in their own viewpoint. And I think that phenomenon can be spotted here and there, like we have Eleusis, the Mysteries of Eleusis in Greece, which is it's dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. It's this very feminine based cult of death and rebirth. And we have this honoring of the goddesses in a way that we don't necessarily get in the everyday written down myths. Instead, it's a mystery. You're not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah. And the mystery of Isis, which also
Mhm.
comes out of Egypt.
Yeah.
And Sibylle.
Again, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
Of course, we're almost an hour in, and I feel like we've given the impression that only the feminine can be monstrous, which is not at all true.
Yes. So, I mean, no, but there are a lot of instances of that. But
Yeah.
maybe what else constitutes a monster in ancient storytelling? Are there other things that maybe we haven't picked at yet or discussed?
I think for myself, at least in sort of ancient Greece and Rome, the first monstrous sort of aspect that's come that we would maybe qualify as like a villain, less so than a frightening monster. I don't know, it's not the right word, but so there seems to be always sort of the bad guy, the villain guy, but it's always a little unclear who it is, whether it's Agamemnon. But then there's sort of a hero worship of that, or whether it's Achilles, or whether it's I can't think of another villain that's coming to mind now. But when I think about sort of when people ask me what are the male monsters in ancient Greece and Rome, the first thing that comes to mind is like a kind of villain in a story, the anti-hero of some kind. And I don't know, maybe you guys have maybe something's coming to your mind of
What about Typhon?
Yeah, I mean, physically you could call him a monster, I guess.
He's got like 1,000 snakes for feet, and he fights so fiercely with Zeus that the earth turns to lava. You know, it's not monstrous, and like it certainly qualifies by the terms we've been using.
Yep.
And then we have like the Hecatonkaitis, like all and the giants, and like things that are
The Cyclops and the giant,
physically imposing and different and outside of human civilization in a way, and opposed directly to human civilization.
Yes. And that idea of going outside of normal civilization, and also again, what is a monster or a villain or a treacherous figure or so? It is Dionysus, so the male god who takes away the women of Thebes, the Minas, the Bacchantes. That we see it is a god, so a male figure tricking all the women into going away, going with him, joining him, going away from the city, and then performing all sorts of strange rituals in the forests, as if those women are completely taking over their own society at that point, but they are out of the city, away from normal civilization in that way, and they
The
are in a way
transgression
tricked
of
by that.
norms.
Yes, they're in that way tricked by Dionysus into following him.
I mean, I wouldn't say tricked. I would like to say invited.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on whose perspective you take, but
Yes,
if
of
we look
course.
again at one of the most well-known versions, if we look at the Euripides, the Bacchae, it really isn't Dionysus who's the monster there, right? It's Pentheus.
Yes.
It's the human man who's stuck inside his walls, both literal and figurative.
Yeah.
But that transgression of norms where we can't tell if Dionysus is human or god, man or woman, humanoid or bull. So that feels verging on the monstrous. But then we also have things like, we have the drakon, the python
Yes.
that Apollo kills. And that's again that is a Proto-Indo-European myth, the slaying the serpent, the killing the dragon, and have how to kill a dragon right here. Like, this is important. So like this is kind of, there is also the male monster, but the fact that it is male may not be as important as the fact that it is destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of, you reminded me of what I've sort of been thinking of as I'm listening to this, is like the only other, I guess by like Western standards, the only other monster that I can really think of in ancient Egypt is Apep or Apophis, right? Who is most oftentimes referenced as like a giant serpent or a worm sometimes, and is like this creature that's beyond civilization, right? Even beyond the universe, in the before universe, the primitive. And every single night, the sun god, who's thought to be the sun, right, has to travel through the underworld and has to be able to fight all of these things, to be born again as the sunrise, right? And that's the start of every new day. That's the cyclical nature of the universe. And halfway through the night, he has to face Apep or Apophis, and when you look at it in the literature, there's so much protection around that moment. There's additional gods and goddesses and deities with knives and spears and fire and ropes and other snakes or other serpents that help to fight, help the sun god fight, because not winning or losing to Apophis means that the universe or the civilization as we know it is literally swallowed up and ceases to exist. There's a lot of ceasing to exist, I feel like. So it's interesting that is known as a male deity, or as a male creature or monster, but I'm not sure, like you said, so that matters as much as it is about sort of like removing it from society or being this giant, scary, dangerous thing that needs to be defeated and overcome.
Yeah. Which is not to say that the snake theme isn't somewhat phallic. Because
Yes.
it is.
Yeah.
But like this like giant serpent we're talking about, this is what becomes the Western dragon myth, which you like very distinctly, what a dragon is very, very different in these traditions than what it is in China or Japan, where a dragon is a beneficent nature spirit. But like there are other male monsters that can even be tied to nature, and often to the heavens too. Especially like I'm thinking about Japan, where we have these oni, these demon gods, who are the embodiments of thunder and lightning, and they're basically just ogres or cyclopes with like giant clubs that they bash on the earth and it makes the thunder sound. And like these are dangerous nature spirits. They can hurt you, but you can also turn them away with walls, civilization.
Mhm.
There's a festival every year, the Azuki Bean Festival, where you so these are like the sweet red beans that you get in Japanese food. Um, but the tradition to keep the oni out of your house is you take the red beans and you throw them at all the openings in the walls to scare the demons away, because these are the signs of civilization. These are the things that humans built that keep us safe from these male nature gods. And when Apollo slays the python, what does he establish there but a center of human inspiration? This is where the muses now live,
Mm.
right?
Although, like, to be fair, the oracle at Delphi predates Apollo, and they use the snakes and the python. And so I always think that of the python at Delphi as female. And and then Apollo calls the oracle of Delphi the Pythia. And so it, to me, that all has always symbolized the Greeks literally like marking their territory, because we know that there were oracles there for thousands of years before the Greeks arrive. And whether that's because the plates or because the gases that were coming through or because of, supernatural abilities. And so, yeah. And so the snake has always there been connected to the prophetic ability of women. And of course, Apollo, who's a little bit of a douche, decides to slay it, and then has the nerve to call the oracle the Pythia. Like, what a stomping of that. So yeah, so I think that's fascinating that that the serpent is sometimes seen as masculine, but also in this connection to, again, to women and to knowledge,
Mhm.
like dangerous knowledge, larger than life knowledge. And when you're talking about Zilla, when you're talking about the Dracon, it reminds me of, like, I come from Romania, which is like from Transylvania, and Dracula's or Vlad Tepes' actual line is a dragon line. So he comes from a dragon genealogy. So their name is Dracu, which is sometimes the devil, but often the dragon. And so when you're talking about that, I'm like, wow, what an interesting connection there, again, to the serpent-like dragon figure. And then, of course, Bram Stoker makes him into a vampire.
Mm.
Yeah. But like we do have other outcomes of this dragon where it is more explicitly male. Like I'm thinking of Beowulf here, which is very much in the same tradition. There's a version in the Vedas as well where Agni and the dragon, where he defeats a dragon that's stopping up all the rivers. And I believe in both cases the dragon is explicitly male, but it's much more dragon-like in both those cases.
Yeah, do
But
you
we can
find there are
tell it's the same myth.
dragon females, like post-Roman? I mean, I don't think I can. I don't think I can think of any. And certainly in popular culture, like even Tolkien and stuff, all those dragons
Yeah,
are
yeah,
they're
you're
all
right.
green, they're all hoarding things.
Yeah, not until we start getting, more like modern fantasy style stuff. But that doesn't mean they don't exist. That just means I don't know about it.
Yeah, I was racking my brain trying to come up with female dragons, and I was in D&D world.
Yeah. Well, there is Tiamat. I mean, there is Tiamat.
That's true.
That's it predates Rome for sure. So, the great dragon of heaven, the great goddess, again with the chaos and destruction. Like, there's power and protection in invoking Tiamat as well.
It's true. So I guess, well, this leads me to another question, which is, what can we learn from the ancient tales of monsters? What can we bring from these stories into the modern day?
I feel like it really comes down to like power and control. Like, And I feel like you could say the same thing about mythology, right? And obviously mythology is the source for lots of creatures and monsters. It becomes about explaining your surroundings, explaining the uncertainties of life, giving a face or name or some kind of body or being to the things that you don't understand. And it, whether that's power, control, chaos, the universe, life, death, whatever it is, right? And then it kind of goes from there. Then you can overcome the monster and you have the power to overcome death, right? Or you have the power to assume its power, things like that. So I feel like that's what a lot of this is trying to explain, right?
Yeah. I connect to that a lot, Jess, because now that you say that, I think it's also a way for heroes to claim power,
Yeah.
or for divinities to claim power, like Yahweh defeats Leviathan, Gilgamesh, defeats the bull of heaven, Perseus
Yeah.
defeats Medusa. It's a way to signify that the person that you were either idolizing or worshiping has overcome
Mm-hmm.
something so devastatingly drastic, monstrous, etc., that they deserve whatever accolades we are giving them. Interestingly, I'm having trouble finding a heroine or somebody that we idolize or worship in that feminine category that has overcome.
Yeah, usually a heroine has to endure suffering
Yes.
rather than fight a monster.
Yeah.
Which is part of what's so monstrous about Medea, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
she's in a lot of ways usurping the masculine role by taking action.
Yes.
Um,
There is Atalanta who defeats the Caledonian Boar.
That's
yep.
true. Yeah, that's
Atalanta
true.
is one of my absolute all-time favorite heroines. She's great. But yeah, you get this tradition of generally Artemis worshipping female heroines who are like, they're virginal, they're basically just like all of the young male warriors but better. And then they have to like settle down in a corner or die. Like
Yeah.
like Atalanta, like Camilla, who seems to be modeled after her. We have that sort of role where they can break mores to a point. And like you almost see this with Joan of Arc too later, right? Like it's the
Yes.
same
Oh,
story,
fantastic.
right?
Yes.
Where a woman is able to become this pure symbol of of pushing back against evil, of taking up arms against the things that are evil, but only if she is later put back in her place.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been talking a lot, but I have this whole thought about what looking at mythological ancient monsters tells us about how we're using monsters in modern fiction. Like if we look at the American zombie, the cinematic tradition of the zombie, right? What it is very clearly allegorical. In media studies, this is one of the sort of like this is one of the things you often follow is like zombies can be consumerism, right? The people drained of self by reckless capitalism, or zombies can be the woke mind virus. Like it's used as this fear of groupthink for whatever reason. This fear of lack of individuality, and of being consumed by that, of becoming a part of it and losing yourself, which in an effectively global society makes a lot of sense because you are now one tiny drop in an ocean in a way that you might not have been when we didn't have the internet.
I wonder if that also ties into the American dream and the individualization.
Mhm.
Because as you're saying that, I'm thinking, well, community is a big part of many other cultures, and also matrifocal matriarchies. Community would be welcomed. Group think. I mean, not
Yeah.
quite group think like a brainwashing, but group think as in collaboration.
Mhm.
Uh, but it makes sense that it would be sort of in the West.
It's a very American point of view.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, like you can also take this question to a totally different part of the world and a totally different monster. The whole tradition of kaiju movies
Hmm.
is, I mean, this starts with Gojira,
Okay.
which is very explicitly the bomb.
Mhm.
It starts out as being very explicitly Godzilla is a nuclear weapon. How do you cope with that? How do you come together to deal with that? And I just for the record here, not that I am in any way a Godzilla expert, but I find it fascinating that when Godzilla was first translated into English, the American market would not tolerate, when I say the American market, I mean the American executives, would not tolerate a fully Japanese cast, so they filmed an American and like laid him over top as the protagonist.
No way.
Yeah, it's
I didn't know
amazing. And it changes it from a collective dealing with a disaster to an
Mhm.
individual hero fighting a monster.
Yeah.
And I think that's really telling.
It is.
And then the sort of flip side to that is that we start to get reversals of monster myths. Like if you're at all into comics, there's this one called Monstress with Monstress, as in female monster, and
Mhm.
like where we get we get princesses who are best friends with their dragon, keeping all of the knights away from her. We get, like, I'm not specifically in Monstrous, but like I'm just like pulling these tropes that I have read in modern fantasy. We get dragons who are like, if you've ever read the Patricia C. Reed series dealing with dragons, like the dragons are just this full society and the humans keep pestering them because it's what they're supposed to do. Um, we get all of these things where you invert expectations, where women are allowed to do what they want and not get punished for it because they choose to leave that society. Where the princes, like in Shrek, where Prince Charming and the fairy godmother, the symbols of fairy tale, are turned into the villains. And this is very, I mean, I know that I'm coming at this from a specifically sort of Anglophone Western place in terms of the content that I mostly consume. But that's a very, very common trope now is, okay, but what if it doesn't have to be that way? What if we can change what's normal? What if
Mhm.
instead of reifying these norms, we can use the same stories to change the norms?
I mean, this is Twilight culture, right? Like from where the vampires become the friends, where the werewolves. I mean, so yeah, absolutely. There's a whole I don't know,
Yeah.
10 years, 20 years, however long it's been, where people either fall in love with the monster or
Oh,
become.
well before that, honestly. I mean, I think you can maybe point to Camilla, which
Well,
is like one of the earliest vampire novels, which is a lesbian novel.
yeah,
Mhm.
that's true.
And like that whole tradition of,
Yep.
and like Anne Rice, and like there's a long tradition in female writing, in erotic writing, in romance writing, and now in young adult writing, of the monstrous becoming appealing. There's actually a really lovely video essay by Lindsay Ellis about this. The Women Who Love Monsters, I think is what it's called. But like, it's also like she was kind of taking a look at Guillermo del Toro's work, right? Where you have a woman falling in love with a fish creature,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So, or that very strange amorality that appears to be Pan in Pan's Labyrinth. Like these things which are monstrous from some point of view and glorious from another one.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And of course, that says more about us as a culture than the monsters themselves.
Yeah.
And this sort of Western tradition of now, but it also maybe says something about our psyche and our maybe I don't know if I want to say evolving, but whatever, the way that we're moving in a way in which the hero has become, it's kind of like the Loki obsession, right? Like where people prefer Loki to Thor, you know. Perhaps in the West or in North America, we're living in such peaceful times, and I say that in high quotations,
Oh,
that the
gosh.
monster seems attractive because the hero is no longer really necessary to
Yeah.
lead the war, to protect the, I don't know, I'm just kind of, that's just coming to
Yeah,
me.
or perhaps not so much not necessary as that we have the leisure, the space
Hmm.
to look at that hero critically
Yes.
and say, what does that actually do for us? Is it really protecting us or is it hurting us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of ways, you know, like somebody like Theseus, unquestionably a hero in the original sense of the term, but
What a douche.
I actually have a long-standing argument with Liv Albert, who has the
I love
podcast Let's
Liv.
Talk About
Yeah.
Myth Baby,
Yeah.
and she thinks Theseus is the worst. I think Jason is the worst.
Mm.
I think Jason is the real monster.
I agree on both counts. Yes. With both of you. And I'll throw
Yeah,
in
we don't
Perseus
really
there
disagree.
too.
It's like they're all kind of awful when you think about it, and Beowulf too.
Yeah.
Like it's not just Greek heroes; it's also heroes in general. Like ew. But like I keep thinking about Frankenstein. Like we talked about Dracula earlier. But in Frankenstein, you know, education is knowing that the monster is not Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Wisdom is knowing that Frankenstein is the monster.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that.
Oh, I didn't make it up. It's
Yeah.
been around the internet. I can't take credit for that. But it's true, right? It's you know, like this man who decides that he has enough knowledge to play God and really
Yeah.
screws up somebody else's life. You know, he calls his creation the monster all the way through. But you realize like up until you find out that he's killing people, like what's monstrous about him? It's just his looks. Who cares?
Yeah.
The real monstrosity is creating life and not caring for it.
That's it. Yeah.
Yes. Which also brings me to the appearance of what's monstrous. And one of the things I talk about with my students when we talk about monsters is how many monsters actually appear normal or beautiful. So it's like, well, this usually leads to our serial killer talk, right? And how many serial killers, how many were like, oh, he just looked like a nice guy. And how I always say to them, we're so used to horror movies and all these representations like we're talking about. So if you see something frightening or scary, you run. But actually, if you see someone that looks like you, like whatever, you don't run. But the monster's hiding inside that. And so that's what that reminds me of, especially with Frankenstein, because the only thing that's frightening about him is the way he looks. And so that's identified as, oh, scary, bad. But really the so-called intelligent, or well, the educated doctor is the true monster. in that as well.
I wonder if that's something that's like kind of evolved with our society. Because I feel like in ancient societies, right, the monster, if you can come up with a definition, is very clearly something different and something identifiable, right? It's nature, it's creatures, it's other than human, right?
Yeah.
And it was a way to like cope, right, with their environment and cope with the dangers and cope with the things they didn't understand. But I wonder if we've come to know more about our surroundings, right? We've come to feel like we're in control of our surroundings more. The monster becomes more insidious, right? Blends into our society more, becomes more of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's a danger to a modern human? It's not generally nature, it's
Not
other
anymore,
humans.
no. Yeah, not anymore. Right?
It's we don't fear the werewolf because it's a wolf. A wolf isn't scary to a modern human.
Yeah.
Mostly because they're never going to meet a wolf in an environment where a wolf has power. That's not so true before modern urban development. But the Caledonian boar is in some ways a monster. Like boars, wolves, bears, hippos, these creatures of the natural world that become monstrous in some way.
Yeah.
The original werewolves, whichever version you want to go with, maybe like Kaon, they're scary because they're dangerous. They could kill you.
Yeah.
But these days, the werewolf is scary because you could become that. The werewolf is scary because it could appear normal enough to get close to you.
Yeah. And I think that really shows that the stories, like in mythology and how society, in a way, sort of creates what we see as a monster and what is good and evil. It's really all part of how you see society, what society you come from, what background you come from, how you see what is good and evil, what might be what might be a monstrosity. Yeah.
And this all makes me think of Stone Blind, Natalie Haynes, one of her more recent novels, where she remakes the story of Medusa. And she asks, what is the monster? Who is the monster in this novel? And to quote it, it's she is someone who cannot be saved. So the monster in that retelling becomes a monster out of the failure of society and the failure of the gods.
Which is not that different from how Medusa is portrayed in Stray Gods, the video game.
True.
So, bit of a spoiler, sorry. But go play it, it's fantastic. If a Greek mythology musical role-playing video game doesn't sell you, I just don't know. But the portrayal of Medusa, like everybody talks about her before you see her as dangerous, uncontrollable, monstrous, like you like, okay, so you've met some Greek gods at this point. You've even met the Minotaur, and they're all like, I mean, maybe they're not all fluffy and angelic, but they're fine. They're people. People tell you Medusa is a problem. She is a monster. And when you go to see her, it becomes very clear that yes, she is very dangerous. Yes, she is kind of monstrous. She eats people. But her circumstances, her incurable addiction to human flesh, which is kind of how it's presented, and her isolation, her mistreatment by Athena, who is her master, has made her this way. She very clearly views herself as a monster and has decided to live up to it, which is a very real thing, how we know that humans act when they are treated as a monster, when they're expected to do bad, When they're punished for not doing anything at all, they go, well, fuck it, I might as well be what everybody says I am. So, like, this is kind of coming back to that modern trend of inverting what is monstrous. And I do think it's very feminist. Like even Frankenstein, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley was a very feminist person. Her mother was one of the first advocates for women's suffrage, et cetera, et cetera. But like all of these rehabilitations of Asterion, of the Minotaur, who no longer apparently eats people, or maybe never did, or maybe we could have if we look at the video game Hades, where he's come a long way and he's this very honorable person who thinks of Ariadne as his sister, and like we can see the human in the ancient monstrous because we don't fear quite the same things. And so in order for them to still be monstrous, they have to attain that status in some way that makes more sense to us now.
Yeah. Agreed. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I'm also thinking, in the ancient world, there was so much fear, like you said also, Jess, and we've all said, of other people. So it was, there are some xenophobic sort of elements to it all, like, the outsiders or the barbarians or the outsiders look differently, or perhaps, I don't know, they decorate their bodies differently or whatever it is. And so that might have been proposed as monstrous. We don't know exactly if everyday ancient peoples really thought that way, in their everyday experiences. But certainly from what we have left, it seems like, or for the fact that the Mycenaeans turned the Minotaur story. I mean, it's their story. It's not a Minoan story, because we don't have any Minoan stories. But the Mycenaeans make the Minotaur into a monster that eats Athenians, because, right, the Athenians disliked the Cretans and certainly the Minoans. And so we have these strange people on this island that are so mysteriously successful and seem to live this life must have a cost. There must be a cost for that. And perhaps the cost is the story of the Minotaur eating these Athenian youths. But it's the Minoans that are made into the monstrous, right, to the Athenians. And then, of course, the Athenians are the heroes. So, so like the other, where, you're right. Like now, as a global society, we're less fearful of the other. And I'd like to think we're less fearful of the appearance of individuals, right?
Yeah, yes and no. So so like in modern media studies, you really have to be careful of both of those things. Because just because now it doesn't look explicitly like a monster, like a non-human, doesn't mean it isn't portrayed as monstrous. Like take the Wonder Woman movie, for example, where the evil scientist is stuck in, like, her face is half melted off and she's stuck in a Phantom of the Opera half mask. This has been criticized to heck and back. It's playing into this trope, right, of the beautiful Amazonian warrior who is complete and self-reliant and has a good relationship and this, that, the other, is the hero. That's an acceptable woman. But the scientist, the intellectual woman who is ugly, scarified, made monstrous, who is craven, who is attention seeking, that's the villain, right? And like that's still there.
Yeah. Is that directed by men, though?
Huh?
Is it directed by men and written by men? Is that the one? Or no?
I mean, I actually don't know if it was directed by a man, because there was a lot of really good stuff in it too.
Because I saw
there's
some,
certainly.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Oh yeah, the
Uh,
second one was directed by a man, and like I have not seen that, so I can't
Yeah.
really speak about it.
I saw something that was talking once about I don't know. I saw something on TikTok or somewhere that was talking about the Titanic and Rose when she's older and how she throws the diamond in the water. And there was all of this, there was this discussion about, oh my God, you know, instead of loving the man that she was married to and that she lived with and blah, 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 she still remembers this old dude, that's this young dude, Leo's character, whose name's not coming to me, Jack. And then, you know, at the end of her life, instead of appreciating her husband, let's say, she goes and does this thing. And I was watching it, and then all the comments in there were like, oh, well, you know, women are like that, or women did it. There seemed to be this whole, they don't appreciate. And my thought was, but you know, that movie was written by a man and directed by a man. And so in a way, that's the interpretation of that character, and the creation of that character is actually the imagination of the writer.
Right.
So
And like
multi-layered.
also like just the premise that that's not a thing that's acceptable in the first place bothers me. Because do you stop loving someone who's gone just because your life keeps going?
Yeah.
Are you not able to hold your love for your parents, for instance, at the same time as your love for your partner? Why not? And of course, for me personally, I go even further with this, as I personally am polyamorous, and I think that it's very silly, the idea that we have to just love one partner. Why? If you and your partner both want that, that's great. But why is it bad to do things other than that?
Yeah.
And throughout most of human history, it wasn't, right?
That's right.
And in different cultures across the globe, it still isn't. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things of like, we have to be conscious of what is a very modern misogyny versus what is a long-standing tradition. Like they're so intertwined. We can't fully separate them. But it's not just misogyny either, because I was also thinking of well, let's take the Resident Evil video game series, where it's inevitably set in a foreign country. So you get Arabs or Latinas or whatever, or Romanians, I think, in one of them, who are the zombies, and the white protagonist killing them indiscriminately. Is that not fear of the other in a racialized context? The same way that, the Greeks would talk about the Amazons, who were in some ways monstrous women to them as well.
Yep.
Probably were just Scythians, but but like, I think in Resident Evil it's almost less problematic because it's more obvious than something like Call of Duty, which is based on the real life current prejudices of whatever war is being stoked. Like, Islamophobia in this country is not helped by those games, right? By seeing them as the other, as the monster, as the thing that you kill.
That's right. I think that's probably one of the most suitable definitions of monsters, as the other. I think it gives it room to really shift around everything we've talked about. It's something that's the other or foreign to you, and I think that fits really well with what you're saying about video games. Yeah.
I do feel like that also goes back to the other question that was asked about, like, what are these myths and monsters trying to tell us, right? Like, if we're referencing ancient and modern other at the same time, like, right, we're just using these stories as a way to grapple with the things that we're trying to understand, right? In ancient, you could have the other or a monster be something as simple as like physical deformity, right? And that's why people lean into groupthink, or they lean into like us versus them, nature versus society, that kind of a thing. But now right, we're still dealing with this other. We're just making it more complicated. We're making it more set in modern problems like racism and, you know, prejudice and all these different aspects. But at the end of the day, it's just the other, right? We're doing the same thing with our stories.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that goes back to how women are seen in Greek myth, like Medea, Cassandra, Helen of Sparta, who were all taken away from home and end up somewhere else as being foreigners. And Medea in Euripides' play complains about after Jason has abandoned, Jason abandoning her, and then she complains about now being on her own as a foreigner in a foreign country with not having any rights. Having even less rights in a way than Greek women, because Greek women were already, already had these very had these lives of being very much locked away, always being controlled by their parents and their husbands. And these women that are taken away and end up in foreign countries, they have even less rights, basically, in that way.
Yeah, and just to return to the Japanese side of this for a bit, just because that's the other half of what I've studied. There's so much more to the world than just a myth here or there. Everybody has monsters, but in Japanese myth, these yokai or the oni, they seem to come out of nature most often. Fox spirit, something from the snow, something from the lightning. There are multiple animals that have like an associated personification as trickster spirits, but they also have objects turning into ghosts. Like there's something known as the kasa obake, which actually could happen to any man-made item. After 100 years of neglect, it will come alive. It will wake up. And so you get these depictions of like the kasa obake is specifically like the most well-known one is an umbrella. And basically it after 100 years of non-use, it wakes up and it like develops an eye and a foot and it hops around and it will haunt you. It will just be there as a ghost umbrella and you know try to annoy the people who have neglected it. And like obake could be anything, right? So it's people. You have the ghosts, you have the hungry spirits, which you also see in China and other areas around there. And to be clear, like Japan at the time that these myths are being written down, at least, is essentially a protectorate of Japan is essentially a protectorate of China. So like the way we have things written down initially are in Chinese characters that are like being stubbornly squished onto a language they're not suited for and stuff like that. And so instead of this sort of like fiercely xenophobic independent Greek city-state, we have these sort of like, okay, well, we are ourselves and we are Japan, but we are part of something bigger. Not that most historical documents will admit this, but like there's this sense of it's not the foreigner that is the problem. It is it is the things around us that are in the shadows, that are in the dark, that are out in nature that we have no control over.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because I feel like I don't know if I would necessarily lump demons in ancient Egypt into monsters, right? If I'm trying to consider monster like across a large span of time, but like they very much embody that. You can get something as simple as a headache demon, right? And there's one single instance of it being drawn or referenced, and it looks like a tiny child just crunched in a ball. Like that's the depiction of the demon, right? As like having a really bad headache. But it was something they maybe didn't understand, right? Or something that they're like, oh, this is a nuisance, so I'm gonna put it outside of myself, right? I'm gonna externalize it, and it becomes an other, a something else that bothers me. And then you can get demons that, you know, wander around and can cause nightmares or can cause dreams. They could maybe even be your ancestors trying to tell you something. You know, they also have functions in places in the underworld where, you know, they can harm you and maim you and keep you down there forever, you know, and they have animal heads and knives and fire and all of these different things. So it's interesting that you say that it's this, right? It's this externalization, but it's also this inspiration from the things that are around you, but the things that you're a little bit scared of.
Yeah, and the when I was talking about reification of norms, I wasn't thinking about this, but it's still very true that like a lot of these are about cultural values, right?
Mhm.
Especially when we talk about the dead. It's like you honor your ancestors or they become a hungry ghost or they become a vengeful wailing woman or you know, or they will wander the shore of the Styx forever unburied. Like there are consequences to not doing the rituals, and that is monstrous too.
Right. Yeah, actually, now that reminds me of cases in which monsters are born out of some type of unhappiness, either in life or some type of disconnect in the sense that the descendants didn't perform the ritual properly. So that that sometimes monsters are born out of some kind of um, no, maybe unhappiness, or maybe something's not fulfilled right, something's not completed right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry. Uh, we have had a comment come in. I'm just reading it. I'll read it out. So Majora Z on Twitch says, they're coming late to this. I don't know how much Mesoamerica has come up, but Dr. Caroline Dodds Pennock has a paper called Women of Discord about ties women in relation to positions of power and causing disruption, which she also talked about in more depth in subsequent lectures in relation to destruction goddesses and how they contrast against similar male deities. And then they continue that there is especially an interesting dichotomy in that both men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth were seen as having a glorious, honorable death and were comparable. But in the afterlife, those men become butterflies and hummingbirds, suckering from the sun and flowers, whereas women become destructive things.
Yeah. We haven't talked about Mesoamerica much just because none of us are specialists. Although it did bring up La Llorona earlier, who is like a Chihuacateo. She is a spirit, a vengeful spirit of death and childbirth, but more specifically of a woman who has lost her children and who takes others in sacrifice. And that really does. We did talk quite a bit earlier about the feminine as scary in a lot of the myths that we have written, and the power of the feminine as a both protective in an apotropaic sense, and as a deeply frightening concept for a lot of these myths. So that's something that we find in a lot of different places. Um, and yeah, when it comes to ghosts, to shades in particular, we see some of this in Greek and Roman texts where, you know, the shades in the underworld are depicted as, you know, generally suffering, like it's not great down there no matter what. But, you know, Achilles, grand hero, is down there as basically king among shades. And he's like, well, it still sucks. I'd rather be a slave above than king in hell. But, you know, the women that we see as sort of in that Elysium state are not necessarily, you know, they're not necessarily great warriors. There's Dido, who is, she is a grand queen. She saved her people. She's clever. She's powerful. But in the end, she's killed by love. She's not a fighter. That was never her. She wasn't a warrior queen. She was an administrator and a thinker, a planner, and a lover. And her whole story is about love. Love of her previous husband and her love of Aeneas. And yeah, I should not get on a rant about how much I hate that story. But if you're gonna read the Aeneid, read book 3. It's the best one. Bleeding trees, let's go. But like we also see like Odysseus's mother, I think, was it? Like these women who were faithful, who were nurturing. Those are the women who in the afterlife have this position, this like pride of place. Yes. And like when Aeneas goes down there, when he's like listing famous women that he sees, you know, he sees Helen, right? Like he sees, she's not necessarily a good person, depending on the version, but her role as the most beautiful woman in the world cements her as important. But we're not going to see Atalanta.
True. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're not going to see the women who made their impact by stepping out of the feminine role, generally.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of more Eastern myths that are like this, and most of what I'm coming up with are the hungry ghosts, who are uniformly depicted as men. In fact, they often have exaggerated phalloi. The hungry ghosts, they have exaggerated stomachs and phalloi and teeth, and they're naked and they just and that I don't think I've ever seen one that was depicted as female. Which is not to say that there aren't plenty of female ghosts. We've already talked about a few, but like the ones that come back in that particular way, the ones that are hunters rather than sad or just like grasping out for something that is related specifically to their life, tend to be male.
Yeah. And thank you for your comments. I would say it again reflects how in many societies, men and women were seen as differently, because although both the man and the woman in this case, in the Mesoamerican examples, they had a sort of glorious death, the man on the battlefield, the women being in a way killed in childbirth because they didn't survive. But then again, it shows how the men are turned into like beautiful creatures, the hummingbirds, the butterflies and such, while the women become sort of destructive monsters, showing that also in that Mesoamerican mythology. And I'm not an expert, so I'm sorry if I say anything wrong, but I would say again, it very much shows how in many of those ancient cultures, when you compare it to Greece, Rome, the Middle East, how women were seen in those days and also in all those myths.
Yeah, and again, I just want to emphasize that a lot of the myths that we have that have survived for one reason or another, have been transmitted for one reason or another, are the ones written by men, are the ones that men thought were important. And sometimes the ones written by women or about women have been suppressed. So like these are the ones that we focus on, but I don't want to give the impression that it has always been this way and that it always has to be this way, because that's certainly not true.
Absolutely. And let's see, I think we've got about 10 minutes left. So how about we start maybe wrapping up? We can go round table again. If anyone has any parting thoughts they want to share, now's the time, as well as anything as far as social media links, projects, things people can do to look you up and follow you. Okay. And we can start from my right again with, I guess, Martine, and just go round table.
Yeah, cool. Thanks everyone. It's I find it very interesting. We've had a very good discussion. I've learned quite a lot from all of you. Again, things connection for a moment. Yeah, it's okay now. Yeah, thanks everyone. I've learned quite a lot from. We've had a very interesting, vivid discussion. I would say we've learned quite a lot about myths in general, and monsters especially, and with this idea that we kept coming back to how women were seen in myths, women as monstrous creatures. I think it really reflects how women were seen in society in these days. And for anyone who's watching, of course, I'm very happy that it has changed by now.
Absolutely. And yeah, we'll just keep on going. I guess Zilla.
So for those of you who missed my intro, hi, I'm Zilla. You can find me on my YouTube channel, Zilla's Athenaeum, or on Twitch in about an hour. I'm going to be doing some Archeo gaming, playing Chants of Sonar, which is a game with a completely new language in it that I'm excited to learn. You can also find me on Blue Sky and Mastodon at Zillable, like syllable, but with a Z. And also, I just want to plug again, we at SASA are doing a monster-themed donation drive. So if you have a favorite monster among those that you would like to vote for, please get your votes in now, because you will be seeing me do a TikTok about whichever one wins.
And if you hit that QR code that just showed up on your screen, it'll take you straight to the page to donate.
But yeah, like in general, I this has been just a wonderful discussion. I've really enjoyed speaking with all of you, and there's some things about the monstrous and about how we continue to use them in the same way that I just think are fascinating. So yeah, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
I'm so glad to have met you all today. It was so much fun. I love monsters. On the Goddess Project, I've done a few episodes on monsters, particularly like harpies, like Greco-Roman, a lot of Greco-Roman. That's my area of expertise. And so it was really fun to have a live conversation with others who can, just kind of pinging ideas off of each other. So this was really wonderful, and I hope that we can maybe do that again for different themes. Like I'd love to try the winter solstice or Christmas, do a panel on all that heritage, or things like that. Because I feel like symbolism and mythology is just such a foundation for we know that's such a foundation for the way we live and the way we celebrate. And so this was really wonderful. And across social media, you can find me at Artemis Expert. I think that's probably the easiest. And then from then on, there's all the other buttons if you want to look around and see what I'm doing. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo the same sentiments. It's always a pleasure to talk to other people who are experiencing what I like to call the call of the abyss, right? Where you want to look at the things that are under the rug or in the cracks, in the darkness, in the corners. Because I always find, and whenever I have these conversations and I get so much joy out of them, you always find that, we're all dealing with the same sort of things or reflecting on the same aspects. That change and morph. I feel like we could have really benefited from a psychologist, maybe, on this panel. So yeah, echoing the same sentiments that I really enjoyed the conversation to be able to talk about those and the importance in ancient and modern society and across time. I have mostly just, academic social media because frankly, I'm not that good at it. But you can find me on academia.edu under Jess Johnson or the Middle Eastern Languages and Cultures Department at UC Berkeley. There's a page that has all of their students and Egyptologists and scholars up where you can contact me.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining us. And of course, we will hopefully be doing more of these panels. I know that it was an idea. We wanted to put them out regularly. So definitely we'll reach out again. And thank you everyone who's watched, who's donated this year to our Halloween Bash Drive. Your support means the world to us as we continue our mission to save ancient studies. And I will end the stream now. Have a fabulous weekend.